In this video, I'll be demonstrating how to complete on your own 14-2. So like all the on your own assignments, I'm going to click here to get the proper set of instructions, and I'm going to put this on another screen here so that I can see it. And step 1 says open the data file power, which is here. Notice that there's also another spreadsheet here which you actually will not need to complete this, so you can just ignore the clear Excel spreadsheet. Power is the only one that you're going to need, so you can just click on that. And in my case, I'm using Chrome, so it pops it down at the bottom here, and I can click on that and it's going to open it in Excel for me. And also in my case, like some of the early on your own assignments for Word, I'm going to have to click enable editing on there because it's Excel is trying to protect you there from malware. Okay, so here we are, and it's going to step 1 asks us to save it, so we're going to save it but with a different naming convention, of course. The convention that we normally use, which is going to be our last name underscore first initial underscore OYO, in this case 14-2. And I don't have to worry about putting the extension on there because Excel will automatically add that. So now we've saved it with the right naming convention in the proper place so we know where it is. And step 2 says in the documentation worksheet, which is where you should start out, enter your name in cell B3, which would be here. So we'll just type in our name and use a function to enter the date in the cell in B4. So this is the same sort of thing I showed you back in on your own 13-2. We can say equal today, open and close your parentheses and hit enter, and it's going to put the current date in there for you. That's very useful if you turn in reports and you need the current date on there, but be aware if you need a date that is the date it was entered, that's going to change every time you open the spreadsheet, potentially, for every day. So that might not be the function that you need depending upon your whatever the task is that you're doing. Step 3 says format the documentation sheet attractively. There's a lot of ways that you could interpret that. There are a couple things I'm going to do here. I'm going to align the date left so all the data is aligned the same way. I'm going to choose a slightly different font here and make it a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to highlight columns A and B and then double click the upright between them so it will automatically, well, maybe that's not going to work exactly right. I'll pull that back a little bit. So that looks kind of nice. You can format it any way you like. That can be interpreted a lot of different ways. Alright, step 4 in the grid worksheet. So click down here where it says grid. That's going to take you to the other worksheet. Format the text in cells A1 and A2 right here attractively. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you a slightly different trick here. I'm going to try to be consistent and use the exact same settings that I used over here. And so one way to do that is select it, like in this case, and I'm going to click Format Painter and then click back over here and highlight these two cells, and it's going to change it to exactly the same formatting settings as in the other one. Okay, this actually is not just an Excel trick. This works in Word and PowerPoint and all of them. The Format Painter is a very, very useful tool, especially if you've made a lot of different complex formatting selections. You don't want to have to repeat those, so you can just you can paint the format, right? That's what it's supposed to mean. So it makes life easy. You can actually double click and it kind of holds it down, so then you can do multiple selections. So that Format Painter is very, very useful. Okay, in step 5, in the range A5 through A28, which would be here, use autofill to enter the numbers 1 through 24. Okay, so I'm just going to type in 1 and 2 to get it started. Highlight those so it recognizes the pattern, and then use the fill handle to drag down, and notice autofill will automatically increment those numbers. Okay, it actually does lots of different patterns, so if you want it to count by 2s or 3s or whatever, enter enough to get the pattern started, and then it will continue that same pattern. Okay, and not just numbers, but it'll do dates and all sorts of things. And so step 6, notice what it does here. We're going to use autofill for this step too. B4 through G4, which would be here, we're going to use autofill to enter provider 1 through 6. So I'm only going to type the first one, provider 1, and when I highlight it and use the fill handle, notice it automatically changes it to provider 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Sometimes you actually don't want it to do that. You want it to be exact, and so in that case you may have to copy and paste instead of using the fill handle. Okay, you can actually there are different ways to use the fill handle, and so if you want to right click on that, it will let you copy or fill the series, or fill with formatting only, or fill without formatting. So it's an extremely versatile tool in Excel, the fill handle. I encourage you to learn as much as you can about it, because it will make your life considerably easier the more you know about how to use it. Alright, so step 7 says format the column headers in row 4 appropriately. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the same font that I used for the other, just so it looks consistent, but not change the size of the font. So keep those smaller so it's obvious that they're not titles like these up here. So step 8 says in the range B29 through H31, which would be down here, we're going to enter formulas to calculate the minimum, maximum, and average, and then format them appropriately. So here, for the maximum, I'm just going to hit equals, because all formulas start with equal, and I'm going to use the max function, and I'm just typing it in. You can actually use the formula search box if you want to, and then open my parentheses, and I'm going to use my mouse to select the range that I want, B5 through B28. You can type it in if you like. I just think it's a little bit easier to use the mouse to select it, and type my closed paren there, and then hit enter. And so the minimum is going to be the same sort of thing, equal, and then the function here is min, open my paren, refer to the same. Now make sure you don't grab the maximum here, because that's not part of the data, okay? It doesn't need to go down through B29, it only needs to go through 28. And then close your paren and hit enter. Average is the same idea here, except the function is called average. Open my paren and make sure I only get down through 28. Close my paren, and voila. Now that I've got those 3 formulas in, I can highlight those. Here again, I'm going to use the fill handle to simply click and drag that across, and notice how it fills in the rest of them. Alright, because I've used relative cell ranges, it's used each column relatively, which is exactly what we want. Notice how some of them, they don't work out to 2 decimal places, so it's got a whole bunch of decimal places here. We want to fix that, so what we're going to do here is we're just going to click the increase decimal. 3 is probably too many, so we'll back that off to 2, but notice how now it makes them all consistent. Okay. The other thing that you can do here, if you like, it says it wants them to step 9, format the range to distinguish it from the data, because it's not part of the data. These are what we might call statistics on the data, so we can maybe make them bold and change the shading to some other color, so it's obvious that they're not part of the data. Okay, you can do anything you want there to distinguish them. That's just some examples of things that you can do so that visually it is obvious that it's a separate part of the spreadsheet. Alright, so step 10 says insert a new worksheet. Here, just click the plus down here. And then here we're going to do something completely different. We're going to calculate a payment for a loan. This is not unlike what you would do if you're buying a car or a house. And the way I'm gonna key it is a little bit more elaborate than what the instructions require you to do, just so I think it's easier for you to understand if I show it to you this way. So the principal amount here is going to be $2,575,000. Okay. 15 years, according to step 10, and the rate is going to be 3.14%. But now I'm going to key this as 0.0314, right, because it's a percentage. And then what I can do is I'm going to click the percentage in the number format here, and notice how it took away the decimal places. So I'm just going to increase the decimal places to 2 so that you can see it's 3.14%. And you want to make sure that this is correct, because otherwise the math will not work out properly. If you put in 3.14 and then make it a percent, that's going to be 314%, not 3%, right? So you have to make sure the decimal's in the right place. And then I can go up here to the principal and do that as currency if I want, take the decimal places off, make it even. Alright, so here's what we're going to do. The payment is what we're going to calculate. Everything else here is a given. We're going to compute the payment. And so in order to do that, instead of typing it in, I'm going to do it a bit differently this time. I'm going to click the insert function option here and type in payment. Okay, so it should find PMT. It actually tells you to use the PMT function in the instruction set. So I'm going to double click that, and then it brings up the function arguments. This is a really nice little interface so that we can enter our arguments, because this a lot of functions, they only have one or very few. This one actually has 5 different arguments. Arguments are just the parameters that go into it so that it can calculate whatever you want. And notice how some of them are bolded over here, like rate, NPER, and PV are bold, and FV and type are not. What that indicates is the bold ones are required arguments. Those have to be there. The ones that are not bold are optional arguments, okay? And if you click down here, notice it will usually tell you what the default is if it's omitted. That way you know if it's going to work or not if you leave it out. Sometimes you have to put them depending on what you're doing, okay? But in this case, let's start with rate. We're only going to need the first 3 for this one, okay, for this particular example. So the rate is going to be the interest rate. I can click the little arrow here and just select it with my mouse and then come back and click this little arrow again, okay? You can type it in too. Either way you want to do it is fine. So the rate, that's the interest rate, is going to be cell C6. So the number of periods, I'm going to do the same thing but point to the 15 here, which is in C5 in my case. And the principal, or the present value in this case, that's what PV stands for, is going to be the principal amount in C4. Okay, and it actually shows you right here the negative 217,889. And the reason that it's negative is because we have expressed the principal as a positive number. So this has to do with cash flows, right? If we are the positive cash flow, the principal means we are receiving $2.5 million. The negative 217 means we are paying $217,000, right? So it's a cash flow is why it's negative. That's okay. You can leave it negative. That's actually correct from an accounting point of view. So depending on how Excel is set up, it's going to format that a little bit different. It might put the negative sign. In my case, it's putting parentheses around it, making it red. There's different standards for how to display negative numbers as far as accounting goes. It really doesn't matter to me how you display it. But now what I'm going to do is this is annually, okay, this data. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put that title in and click 2 cells and hit merge and center, and that's going to highlight that section. Now what I'm going to do is the next step wants you to change the payments to quarterly, but if you change it, I can never see that it was annual in the first place. So what I would rather that you do is copy and paste over here and then do a separate section for quarterly. That way I can see both of them at the same time. Now we can actually leave the inputs alone, and all we really have to do is change some of the formula here in order to calculate quarterly. So I'm going to hit the function here. It's going to bring this up again for us with everything already filled in. Notice because I copied and pasted, it's got the correct references in there, which is really, really nice, okay? And so for the rate, because what it's asking us to do here is calculate if we pay it quarterly, which would be 4 times per year instead of 1 time per year, then we would have to divide the rate by 4, right? Because the rate is 3.14% per year. So the quarterly rate would be 3.14 divided by 4. So all we have to do, we can actually do math directly in here. So it's F6 divided by 4/4. It's all we have to do. And so notice it's showed us out here that equates to 0.7%. Now the number of periods, it's no longer 15 because we're paying it by quarter. It's going to be 4 times as many periods. So here we're going to multiply this by 4, right? So that would be 60 periods, even though it's 15 years. And now the present value does not change. It stays the exact same, okay? It's the exact same amount of money. Notice the result down here is $53,979, which makes sense. Our payments are going to be about 1/4, somewhat less than 1/4 of what they are annually, okay? So if we pay $217 annually, we would pay $53,000, almost $54,000 4 times a year, which makes sense. So we'll just click OK, and there we are with the quarterly payment, okay? And then we want to save that, of course. And then step 12 wants us to rename this sheet as loan, so we're just going to double click on sheet 1 and type in loan and hit enter, and then save it one more time, and we're finished.